Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh, and today I have a very special guest with me today, S. Evan Townsend. Evan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
Oh, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. It's been nice on my relaxing Sunday to talk to you. I had Tild Holt earlier today, Northern Rap, so that was really cool. It's been a great weekend, actually, for me. I had GD Pullman yesterday, and then I had a friend, Sean Bell, on Friday. So it's been a great writing and podcast weekend for me. So
sounds great.
Yeah, nice way to start the November sort of for me. So going right into that first question, what has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Oh, wow. I tell people I started writing when I was 12,
Wow.
and I'm now 61, so you do the math.
Yeah.
I assumed the stuff I wrote when I was 12, the Star Trek fanfic,
Cool.
the television scripts, they weren't very good. I assumed when I wrote, but I've been writing pretty much since then, and I'm self-taught in writing. I never took many classes on. I'd read and try to kind of replicate what I read, not the story obviously or the plot, but the writing. And I basically taught myself how to write. I taught myself how to type, because if I wanted to be a writer, I'd have to know how to type. And I kept writing, and in the mid 80s, I started writing this science fiction novel about mining asteroids. And I kept writing it, and I kept writing it, and I kept writing it. I kept revising it. I kept making it better. And then told you to update, and I'd have to change something in it. And it finally got published about 2011 by World Castle Publishing, and Rock Killer, and it's out there for anybody to buy. And that was my first book. It was actually my third book published. What happened was a friend of mine got published by World Castle Publishing, and she said, "Why don't you send your book in?" I'm like, "Okay, another rejection slip. What the hell?" Because the whole, New York publishing thing got lots of rejection slips. I did the whole agent thing, got lots of rejection slips. So I sent it in. Actually, I didn't send in Rock Killer. I sent in a book called Agent of Artifice, and I sent that in, and they loved it. And I said, "Well, I have this prequel to that called Hammer of Thor." They said, "Send it in," and they loved it. I said, "Well, I got the science fiction novels, and Hammer of Thor and Agent of Artifice are actually fantasies. I have the science fiction novel on my hard drive. It's been on my hard drive for 20 years. Make sure it's up to date and send it in," and they loved it.
Well, that's cool.
That was my writing journey. I just kept writing until finally somebody decided my writing was good enough to publish.
I think that's a really good piece of advice there, right? Just keep writing. Just keep
writing.
Well, that's excellent. That's really cool. I'm actually really happy to hear that first novel for you was fantasy, because I was checking that one out earlier and it sounded really cool. I didn't have a chance to click on the full description, so I'm definitely going to have to add that to the old Goodreads. I've been doing that a lot this weekend. Like I said, a lot of people I've been hanging out with in this little spot, so that's really cool. And that's actually really interesting, that you had, one of those books that you've had for 20 years. I was just talking to Kelly McCullough about that, and we were talking about those backlogs, and I was discussing, with a couple people about, just keep those things there, and you just never know, if you can use it, or revamp it. And I just encourage people, to hold on or to try and do something with it, but don't put it in the trash file, basically, or delete it, because you could be,
in 1989 there was no internet, so I had to put that in the book. There was all sorts of technology I had to update over time. And even now it's been out for 10 years and it's pretty much obsolete because the technology's advanced. I was having humans mine asteroids, but it's probably going to be robots that are going to mine asteroids. So
that's a great point, actually.
Yeah, but it's good to have humans in your story.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never considered that, actually. That actually would be a very interesting concept. Like having, because like Martha Wells with the Murderbot series. That would be kind of interesting to see, like robots or androids, like
As the main
finding
character
that
of the
murder.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that'd be interesting.
interesting.
Yeah. So for this next one, so I did notice that you were in the military for a time. Do
Yeah.
you find that that helped your writing fantasy or science fiction at all?
It helps on the science fiction side. Actually, I started Rock Killer when I was in the military,
Oh, cool.
and so it reads a little bit like Tom Clancy in space.
Cool. That's awesome.
But yeah, I learned a lot about. I was in military intelligence, and I went to school for a year to learn Korean.
Oh, that's cool. I actually
Yeah,
used to take Korean. That's really cool.
yeah, and now I hardly can speak it at all because I haven't
Yeah,
spoken.
yeah, you don't use it, you lose it.
Use it or lose it. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And so, like Hammer of Thor has some scenes in Korea, has some
Oh,
scenes
that's cool.
in Japan, um, has little, language lessons in it about Korean and Japanese and Chinese because they all use the same symbols. The Koreans
Yeah,
have
yeah.
their language. I mean, their alphabet Hangul, but they have so many homonyms, words that sound alike, that they'll throw in a Korean or a Chinese character to clarify it. If you look at like a South Korean newspaper, the North Koreans only use the Hangul, but the South Koreans definitely use the Chinese characters. They call them what they call them, Hancha. And when I was studying Korean, I had to learn some Hancha.
Okay.
There's thousands and thousands of them. I learned maybe 300.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
maybe 4.
Yeah.
But probably more, maybe 10.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at the cover of Hammer of Thor, there's Chinese characters there for Japan. And I had somebody who reads Chinese and say, "Why does that say Japan?" And when the Hammer of Thor is Norwegian and is Nordic, and I said, "Because some of the story takes place in Japan."
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, okay, but so what were we talking about? Oh, military. So yeah, so that's part has helped me being in the military. I learned
Yeah,
about
yeah.
and I also learned about military intelligence and how that works, and that's helped me. And the military instills a sense of discipline, and that's really helped me in my writing because before I was in the military, I would start a story, get a third of the way through it, and then start another story.
Yeah,
Third of the way through it. Now I know I have to finish the dang story.
yeah.
I go on to the next one, and that's how I've written so many books. And what I do if I come up with I'm in the middle of a story and I come up with an idea for another novel, is I'll maybe write the first chapter or two, some notes, set it aside, then go back and finish what I was working on. Because if you do that, if you don't do that, you're going to end up with 50,000 unfinished novels and never finish a novel.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I learned the discipline to finish a novel when I was in the military.
We heard it here first, guys. You got to join the military in order to
Join the
finish your novel.
military.
My friend was talking about that, doing like novel boot camps where they would go and him and his friends finally they got together. They would literally they would get up, like 4:30, and then they would go and exercise a little. They're all like post-military guys and everything. So they would do that, and then they felt like the blood was flowing, and then they'd go at like 6. They'd write like 6 to 7. They'd have another activity. And I'm like, I don't really like waking up at 4:30, but it seemed like it was really fun, just to do for a week. A lot more fun than being in the military, I imagine. So
Probably,
you actually get to be done for a week after a week, and you get a whole I think they write like at least like half a novel or something like that, like in that time. It was an interesting concept, but yeah.
My former writers group that kind of fell apart due to people not liking each other, and we did a writers retreat, and we didn't get up at 4:30. We get up and we go exercise, and then we'd write pretty much all day long.
Oh, that's cool.
All sit in a room and write on our laptops.
Yeah.
And I wrote like 8,000 words that weekend. It was amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I have to try that out. Maybe my buddies and I will do that. We'll go to a retreat here. I know Dirk Ashton did that a little while back with Michael J. Sullivan, ML Spencer, and like a bunch of other people, and definitely seemed to help them out for a few days. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Yeah, I just asked that because there were quite a few people that, like on Lindsay Broker and Joe Lalo's podcast, they had actually talked to quite a few science fiction writers in particular, and it was interesting that so many, especially with the military sci-fi, like there were a lot of different servicemen and women who had really enjoyed them, and I know that they, in fact, many of them hadn't been in the military, but they had spoken to different people in the military, or like military police was one of them I know, which was really big, in terms of the writing process, because they had that group that was interested. So they really wanted to make it authentic for those people. I always thought it'd be really interesting to do that. Like Malazan Book of the Fallen is what my buddy and I are reading for book club. And I always thought it'd be really cool to do that for like a fantasy series, but really get, some of those details down pat, and really kind of go from there. Because the crew, they always seem really interesting to me, the Malazans and the Marines and everything. And you find out some of their tactics and things, but I'm a history teacher, so to me those kind of things are really interesting. So I always thought it'd be cool. I know a lot of people do it in science fiction, but I haven't heard a lot of people do it in fantasy. So I was just kind of curious.
Well, actually, in Hammer of Thor, which takes place partly during World War II.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they're in occupied France, and they have to avoid the Germans, and so I use my tactical training from
cool.
military to avoid the Germans.
Yeah. Oh, that's really neat. Definitely have to check that out now. World War II.
No spoilers, but yeah, it's
yeah, that's definitely one of my time periods that I really enjoy. That seems to be the one that a lot of our students really enjoy as well. So yeah, that's a good one. For this next question, what do you find most challenging about writing fantasy and science fiction?
For fantasy, since I'm writing in the past, I a time period like the World War II, the research is just daunting. You're and I'm lazy. So I open up a Word file, and if I come up with a fact or something, I'll write down where I found it on the internet, what book I found it in, because I don't want to have to look for it again.
Oh yeah.
In a different Word file than what I'm working on my book in. And people say I should use Scrivener, and I'm like, I don't want to learn it. And I think for Hammer of Thor, I had like 3 pages of notes, of reference lines.
Yeah.
Because I had to Google and research, and I read at least 2 books for that novel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and let's see. Yeah, no, 3. I read 3 books for that novel, and for Agent of Artifice, I read 2 books and parts of another one. So it's but it's a lot of the internet is made for writers. I tell you, because I can find almost anything I need to know on the internet. Sometimes, like I had this problem with Agent of Artifice. I got 2 different sites saying 2 different things.
Yeah.
What happened in Cuba during the revolution? And I'm going, which one is the truth? And so I tried to Google and figure out, which one, who agrees the most with whom. And I could never find another source that disputed either of them. So I said, well, I'll just go with the one I like.
That's fair.
Because it's supposed to be another world. It's supposed to be another universe. So, I'll just go with the one I like. And that book had a lot of research in it. And one thing I found on researching old things, if you can find a documentary on television or Netflix or anywhere about that time period in the place you're writing, it's great because you can see what it looks like. They can't give you the smell, and you can see how the people dressed, and it was amazing. I watched a documentary on Korea before the Korean War, and I got so much information out of it. I'm sitting there taking notes while I'm watching the documentary, and this is before cell phones had cameras. I was just thinking, man, I wish I could have taken a picture of the screen while I was doing that. I take notes and remember what it looked like. But Yeah, research is probably my most daunting part. I try to write hard science fiction, but I'm not smart enough to write really hard science fiction.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, I love to read hard science fiction, but I'm just not smart enough to write it. But I love like I'm going, oh, how do I calculate the orbit of a spaceship around a planet? And so I Google what's the formula for orbit, and here's a funny story. I did that. I got, oh, that's right. That's the formula. And then I need my units, what's the altitude of the ship and what's the mass of the planet. And all that stuff's kind of made up in my head, but it has to be reasonable because you have a 10 times the mass of Earth and be livable. And I came up with 1 billion seconds for the orbit. Seconds, that's forever. I go, what is wrong? Well, I found out I screwed, and this is what science teachers will tell you: don't screw up your units. One unit was in kilometers per second. Yay. The other one was in meters per second.
No. I think something I would have done
1,000 times off.
Yeah.
So, but I find that very useful. But research is probably the most daunting problem I have. The other problem I kind of have, and I'll admit this, is my character arcs are kind of weak sometimes because I'm more of a let's tell a fun story and have than have your character, have a crisis and live his life. But that's probably it.
I think that's a really good point. The crazy thing is I've been doing a lot of research. I guess I have been watching documentaries, but I haven't really been taking notes. So I'm definitely going to go back and do that. I just thought I was talking to Sean Bell about this on Friday when him and I were discussing before we started filming, and I said I just like you always have to have that fun project, and I always wonder, being a history teacher, like what really happened to the Lost Legion. And I go and do all this research, and recently, the last 2 years ago, a study came out, and they think they actually went back to Rome or Spain rather, and basically like they were just forgotten about. And I was like, that's the most boring ending to one of the greatest historical mysteries of all time. I said, I'm going to write my own.
It was a bureaucratic mess.
Exactly, yeah. I'm like, I'm like, seriously? And I'm like, you're talking about, I was like, no. I said, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add zombies to it, and we're going to go from there. So I've been, that's like my side project. I've been, really going in. And it was funny talking to Till Holt this morning because she said she really, for Northern Wrath, took it from a historical fiction standpoint and then added the fantastical elements later. So I'm just really interested in your guys' research process. So I'm really glad you said those things because those are a couple of things that I have not considered before. And I feel like that's going to be really helpful for myself and for some other people. So
yeah, I read a short science fiction story where they found a planet that some aliens had taken that legion and stuck them on that planet. And they were
really?
living like Romans after thousands of years. And
I have to write that down.
Yeah. Sounds really it's already been done, so don't steal it.
Oh no, that just sounds really cool. See, I
don't remember the name of the story or anything.
Oh, I'll find it. I know so many people on the internet now. I will find it. That is really
okay.
Cool. And yeah, until they were talking about that, I think that's why her book Northern Wrath has been so popular. Is that it really takes it is a historical fiction book, but it has the fantasy elements. And we were just talking about that too with Sean on Friday and GD Penman yesterday. I just think that in terms of fantasy, that's why I think I like taking breaks and going and reading science fiction because you got so many people where even if it's like the same, I don't know how to explain it. I feel like sci-fi is like a lot of people have the same elements and tropes, but there's just so many different stories. I've never I don't feel like I'm reading the same story over and over. And like, no offense saying, but anybody, but trad publishing for fantasy has felt like that. And that's why I like indie fantasy more now. But I feel like I can literally read any science fiction book. Mark Cooper was one of them with Heavy Duty. I read that book and had so much, like new perspective, characters, things like that. And I don't really know any, science fiction books that I've read at least within the last 10 years, that have felt regurgitated or, used the same plots or characters, even with the tropes in there. I just think that it's a lot different than fantasy nowadays.
If you got science fiction, you're going to have, some sort of faster than light hyperdrive.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody's going to have that. Well,
Yeah.
I don't have that in some of my novels because, well, other reasons. But and you got to have the space battles. You got all these tropes that everybody's got to have, but the story is going to be different.
Yeah, maybe it's because the tropes are. I think maybe the difference. Or I was just talking to this with a couple people last couple weeks. Like we were discussing, maybe the tropes are things rather than like hyperspace. Those different drives and things. Versus characters, versus like elves. And I think like it's like lightsabers, like you could probably do that nowadays and call it something different. And I don't think people will see that as much of a trope as doing elves again, or having them be like I have like elves, but they're half plant and half elf. And they actually use like chloroplast within their skin, and that's why they have such a close like presence with nature, is because they are half nature. So I change ththings like that because to me it's a lot more interesting. But I think you're right there. Yeah, there's different tropes, but I think you guys use them differently than you do in fantasy. And I think it's because those things are just interesting anyway. Like I was researching. I like how you had one of your books involving Mars, because to me that's just like Mars is so cool and you can do anything with. It's just it's always fascinating to see what people are doing with it. So for this next one, so this kind of leads us right into this next question. What do you find most enjoyable about fantasy and the science fiction genre? Like, why those?
My writing journey, writing Star Trek fan fiction. I'm old enough. I watched Star Trek in the old series in first run when I was like 8 years old, 9 years old. And when I could get the TV away from my big brother and big sister. And it's just always fascinated me. Probably the possibilities of it. Stuck on Earth. You're not stuck with life as we know it. It's not boring life as we know it. It has the possibilities. There's so many things you can do. So I started watching Star Trek when I was 7, 8, 9. And when I was a teenager, they showed Star Trek reruns after school. After when I got home from high school, I watched that every dang day. It was on Monday through Friday. And the funny thing was, I lived in Southeast Idaho, which is kind of a conservative area.
Yeah.
They never show what are little girls made of. I moved from California. Said, "Oh, what are little girls made of?" It was a great episode. I said, "I've never seen it." Watched Star Trek reruns, and I thought I'd seen them all, but they never showed that one. I have no idea why, except maybe that outfit was a little skimpy.
Oh yeah.
But and then I picked up a Larry Niven book.
Oh yeah.
I read that and I went, "Oh my Lanta." That just blew me away. And so I'm a little OCD, I think, because I just started reading everything written by Niven I could find.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah. And I read everything I could find by Niven. And, he's got Tales of Known Space, collection of short stories, and, one of which is set in the 70s. And he's got 1970s. And he's a really imaginative writer. I gave my dad, who's totally on science fiction. He's a down-to-earth, life is how you make it kind of guy. So I gave him a short story written by Larry Niven and said, "Read this." And he goes, "I've never known there was that much imagination in the world." I'm like, "Yeah, there you go." And then, Star Trek Next Generation came out, and I was already writing by the time this, I've been writing since I was 12. So, and it was just, what was the question? Oh,
I was gonna say, keep going, because I love, that was one of the first TV shows, that and Seaquest, that I
Yeah.
actually watched because my grandma got cable at that time, and I think it was like,
Ah,
yeah, it was, and I was just
yeah.
like,
And yes, it took 2 seasons for the next generation to find its way.
yeah, yeah.
The third season was amazing,
Hmm.
with the episodes in that. And I was writing and I was submitting to magazines my short stories and getting rejected. And I didn't think I could write a novel until somebody said, write a novel. And so I wrote Rock Killer. Um, but so that's where and I used to say I hate fantasy.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, fantasy, I hate fantasy. It's not consistent, it's not scientific. People, they do whatever the heck they want.
yeah.
And then one day I sat down and I wrote the short story called Lesser Magic, and it's never been published, excuse me. And it's about a wizard, a person with magic powers, who uses math, science to get an advantage with his enemies who won't use math and science.
Mm.
And I came up with some magic rules, and I came up with a setting, how things work in the universe. And one day I remember I was exercising and I was walking around the block. My block is a mile around, almost exactly. I was walking around the block to get some exercise. And I go, what would happen if one of those guys was in World War II?
Mm.
That'd be interesting. And that's where Hammer of Thor came from. And Hammer of Thor started out as a World War II story, and then it got bigger on both ends. So I decided to tell his backstory, and I decided to tell what happened after World War II to him. And that's where Korea came in, and the Korean War. And then for some reason I had this thought, what if all these guys worked for the CIA? And that's where Agent of Artifice came from. And I thought, well, what if one of these guys ran into a shape-shifting assassin? That's where Gods of Strife came from. And which I'm actually doing this out of order, because Gods of Strife is the last book. Well, no, it's not the last book. Anyway, it's complicated. And I thought, what if they ran into vampires? But they weren't really, they're more accurate vampires. They use knives to slit throats instead of, their teeth growing, but they drink blood. They're necromancers, and they can use the blood to increase their power, of their magic power that all the other people have. And that became Book of Death. And Book of Death is a book about how to use necromancy to increase your power. And then Gods of Strife, which was the shape-shifting assassin. And then one day I thought, I'm going to try and write a Western. So I started writing this Western. Well, about 3 paragraphs into it, it turns into a fantasy.
Best kind of Western, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so I start, and I say, okay, if I'm going to write a fantasy, I'm going to do it in my world with people that use magic and that same, all that. So it became a Western prequel to all the other
cool.
novels,
That's cool.
5 novels. Yeah. Set in 1881 Arizona territory and San Francisco. And there you do it. It's like, how fast would it take to get from Tucson, Arizona to San Francisco by train? I found a timetable on the internet.
Oh, that's helpful.
That said exactly how long it took. I found a map of Tucson, Arizona, not Tucson, Tombstone, Arizona. So when my character is running down the street and makes a right to get to the telegraph office, that's where the telegraph office was.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was a fire map. The fire department did it, so they knew what was in the town. The stuff on the internet just kills me. I remember when I first got internet in the 1990s or early 1990s, and I was working full time at the time. I would spend weekends. It was like, well, when I was a little kid, I read the encyclopedia for fun. My mother, I used to amaze my mother. I'd sit down with the encyclopedia and start reading it. So the internet's like one big encyclopedia,
Yeah.
porn. And but I would go through the internet. I would find stuff, and this was linked to something else. This was linked to something else. I was almost addicted to the internet.
I know that feeling.
So I have this sponge brain that likes to be fed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and so fantasy was just, it was bizarre for me because I used to say I hated fantasy. But what I did do when I wrote fantasies is I made sure the magic rules were consistent everywhere. I had rules, I had limitations on the power of my magic users. They couldn't use magic all the time. And because they got tired, they got sleepy.
Yeah,
so they
yeah.
too much magic, they went to sleep. And they had to have a talisman to enhance their magic. And if they lost that, they were in big trouble. And the more powerful talisman they had, the better the magic user they were. So when I wrote fantasy, I made sure it made internal sense. It was internally consistent.
So you're like a more of a hard magic system then.
Yeah.
Because Tolkien's kind of drives me crazy. Like Gandalf can pop in, to certain areas, but he can't just go pop over even closer to help them with the ring. So, yeah, like we were talking about that a while back because Brandon Sanderson talks about that in his lectures, where Tolkien's like there's hard magic when you're talking about the ring, like the one ring, like its limitations, but then Gandalf's like a wild card. Like he just it's very interesting. That's like Brandon Sanderson talks about his hard magic system. I've kind of gone back and forth with that.
Gandalf couldn't teleport. He had to ride horses everywhere. So
unless it's the prequels. Unless it's the Hobbit, and then
the Hobbit. Yeah, that's true. I take that back.
No, he doesn't teleport. Was it Glyndula or whatever her name is? I believe she does, and then Elrond or whatever when they go to save him. Maybe it's just a misinterpretation of the spell on my part, but it definitely looked like they teleported. You kind of wonder, like,
oh, you mean what? Liv Tyler? I can't remember her character name.
Yeah. One of them does that. Yeah, and I'm like, wait a minute. I know they said she's the most powerful out of them, but it always makes me wonder, exactly what the magic system is for Lord of the Rings. Like, there's that it's like there's a second edition of the board game. Like they have like the book and everything. Called the One Ring. My friends and I, we always want to grab it. It's so expensive right now. It's like $225 for a used copy. But I just want to see how they took his world and made a hard magic system out of it. I think that to me would be really interesting to see, because The Hobbit was really one of my pretty much like fifth or sixth. Because I'm like you, I started off in science fiction. I started off reading Star Wars, and then I branched off into reading other people in science fiction. I read Indiana Jones, kind of more of an urban fantasy, the young Indiana Jones novels. But other than that, I mean, it was pretty much Brian, Jakes, like Redwall, stuff like that. But hadn't read a lot of fantasy, then read The Hobbit, and I was like blown away. And then after that, I started reading fantasy like crazy. So yeah, I agree though. It's nice to possibly.
I hate to admit, I haven't read a lot of fantasy. I've read Robert Heinlein's fantasy book, and I've read Paul Anderson's fantasy book, two of them. One I liked, one I didn't. And that's pretty much all the fantasy I've read. And I've written 5 fantasy books, or 6. I'll count.
I have to check those people out. I've not read theirs yet, so trying to keep a little journal now, and like I was saying, like trying to just get some recommendations there. So I'm definitely going to check that out.
No, if you like science fiction, I would definitely recommend Robert Heinlein. I've literally read everything he wrote. If he wrote shopping lists, I would read them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he died in '89, I believe. So he's done making more stuff.
Yeah.
Releasing, here's something we found, we want to read that. And they called him the dean of science fiction. Some of his earlier stuff is a little weak, but whose isn't?
Yeah, I've been there. I'm there right now.
Yeah.
My friends, they asked, they go, can we read your first draft? I said no, because I made 45 different decisions in the first 10 chapters and none of them stuck. So I was like, let me finish draft 2, and then you guys can go wild with it. But I really like Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury is one of those. I really want to read The Illustrated Man. I'm about to go, once I'm done with this current historical fiction book I'm reading, Gates of Fire, that Scott Oden recommended me, said it was the best book he's ever read. It's about the Battle of Thermopylae, and it's from the perspective of one of the slave soldiers, one of the helots.
Wow.
So after I'm done with that, I'm gonna go check out the Illustrated Man. They had this amazing new, I don't know, just like description on the back, this great cover at the library. I was like, that's gonna be my next read right there. I read
Yeah.
quite a few of his and really enjoyed them.
I read Dandelion Wine
Mm.
as a assigned the book in high school, and it didn't grab me, and so I haven't read a lot of Ray Bradbury, and I probably should.
I read the one, I'm totally blank on what it's called, but the one where it's all about Mars and Mars exploration. And
Martian Chronicles.
yeah, I think that book, it like blew me away. Like there were so many things where it just made me, it really made me think of science fiction in a different way. It wasn't exactly one of like, I would say like my favorite science fiction books, but in terms of story, but in terms of ideas, it was really up there for me. So I highly recommended it to quite a few of my past students who were really interested in writing science fiction, and especially reading it. It's definitely very different compared to other people's ideas. But yeah, in terms of sparking ideas for me, it was absolutely huge. And that's where I'm thinking of going back to him again for like the Illustrated Man. One of my friends said that he really loved the Martian Chronicles, but the Illustrated Man, it was like one of his favorite books of all time. So I feel like that's pretty heavy praise from him because he usually doesn't like a lot of people that much. So
Yeah, I think it was Frank Zappa who said so many books, so little time.
yeah, no, right there. Especially now
Yeah,
I'm writing more. I'm like, oh, and
yeah,
pandemic, I'm a teacher, so it's just been like sapping my strength. So I'm just trying to get my own done, and by the end, I
yeah,
just kind of zone out or go to bed. So
yeah.
yeah. What do you think one step is in your writing process that you could not live without?
Oh wow. Um, well, I almost have to tell you a little bit about my writing
Oh,
process.
perfect. Even better.
I'm a pantser, mostly. I kind of liken it to a car trip. I want to go from here to Seattle, and I live in the middle of Washington State. And I know I get on I-90 and I head west, and I know there's places along the way I got to go through, and I'll end up in Seattle. But there's off ramps. There's a lot of off ramps
Yeah.
between Seattle, and maybe halfway there I'll take an off ramp and swing north, end up in or something. And that's sort of how I write. I go, oh, I want to write this book, and it's going to go from here to here to here to here. And I sit down, I start typing. All of a sudden, it takes an off ramp and goes north. That happened in Hammer of Thor. One character said Valkyrie, and the whole book went a different direction.
Hmm.
And I don't even know. I still don't know why that character said Valkyrie. I'm like, shut up, you! I don't want Valkyrie. No Valkyrie in this novel. Okay. So that's my writing process. And the one thing I can't live without in my writing process is the rewrite and the revision. Because one problem with a lot of pantsers, and especially if they don't rewrite and revise enough, is somebody will walk into a room with green jeans on and they'll walk out with red jeans on, and editors notice these things.
Yeah.
And readers notice these things. And so I will write my first draft, and that'll take, depending on the book, a month, maybe 2, sometimes 3. And then I'll let it sit at least a couple of weeks. And the best thing is to have another novel I'm working on. I'm first drafting, but that doesn't always happen because I don't have an idea. And then I'll go back and I'll read it, and they always get longer when I do this. People, I edit my books and they get shorter. I go, no, they get longer for me.
Yeah.
Long, and I'll go, oh, I said Joe walked in the room, but I didn't say he's wearing green pants. He has a Uzi over his shoulder, and he's got a scowl on his face. So I need to put that in the book. And so they always get longer. I started keeping track of this, and the last one, the book I'm working on right now, on its last, by the time of its last revision, had grown by, what was it, 15% about.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was amazed how long that was. It went from like 60,000 words to 50% of 60,000 words, plus 115,000. Anyway, so I couldn't live without that because it was, I assumed if I plot, I was a plotter, and I know lots of plotters, and they sit down and they write. I know one who writes every scene in the book before they write the book. And she says, well, it's basically telling instead of showing. I go, okay, that makes sense. But yeah, I got to go back. I got to do that. I do that at least 3 times. And it gets longer and longer. And then the last thing I do before I send it out for beta reads, and I find this so helpful, I wish I had discovered this earlier, is I have my wife read it to me. And I sit there and listen. And she started to learn what I'm listening for. And I go, oh, we mentioned car door 3 times in one paragraph. Fix that.
Yeah.
Oh, he walked in with green pants. He's walking out with red pants. Let's fix that. Or I might just have a sentence that doesn't make a lot of sense. I thought it made sense when I wrote it, but then when I hear, and I've thought about using the word read out loud thing, but it reads like this, and it goes.
It's so boring.
Yeah. The only problem with my wife is she edits. She won't say certain words. like damn and hell.
Yeah.
Other bad words. She won't say. And I'm like, well, I know you're a sweet woman. I love you for it, but I wish writing has a rhythm, and you need to say those words. Yeah, but she won't. But that's I can live with that. So basically the revision and rewriting process and editing process, I couldn't live without.
It's interesting that you say that, especially with having your wife read out loud. I have heard other people reading it themselves. I have not heard a lot of people having somebody else read to them. So I think that would be extremely helpful, even if you had a couple different people reading, like if you were, in a time crunch or you didn't have necessarily like my wife would just do it, I know, and be really good at it, and could kind of go from there and get the tone or rhythm or whatever. But yeah, I think even in a pinch you could have a few friends or something do it. I think that's really good advice right there. Definitely gonna have to try that out for my draft 2. Get draft 2 done. We'll have her go from there and read to me. That's really good. I like that. So you've already mentioned like Larry Niven, a couple other
Robert
people.
Heinlein.
Yeah, Robert Heinlein. Who are some other influential, either fantasy or science fiction, or maybe even some other authors that you would recommend to our audience to read?
Well, I mentioned Paul Anderson. It's spelled where it's spelled Poul, but it's pronounced Paul Anderson. He died early 2000s, but he's a great hard science fiction writer, and he also writes a little fantasy. And it's people like that just drive me crazy. I'm reading their book and I go, how did I wouldn't have thought of that in a million years.
Yeah. That's me with Larry Niven. I'm with Ringworld. I'm like going through it now. I'm just like kind of hate you a little bit, Larry. Like just like so jealous. You wear my jealousy like a coat,
Yeah, exactly. And let's see, who else can I recommend? Me? No.
Oh, we got you on the list for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm such an OCD reader. I find somebody, I read him forever. There's this writer, he writes historic book, not novels, nonfiction.
Yeah.
Richard, what is his name? Richard Brookhiser.
Oh, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote a book about Hamilton.
Oh, cool.
Alexander Hamilton, and he's written all these books about people who lived in the time of the founding of the United States, and all these books, at least 2. And he's just a really good writer, and I really enjoy. He makes it's a cliche to say this, but he makes the history come alive.
No,
yeah. So he's a good writer. Who else can I recommend? If you like, this is a friend of mine actually, and she is such a good writer. The jealousy coat, wearing that, but she discovered a niche. She writes about animals that are human, and it's called something, that niche, but her name is Frances Pauli, Paului, Paul with an I in the end, and she she writes really good stuff, and we read each other's stuff and help each other out. And I read her stuff, and it's like, oh my gosh, she wrote this short novella about a bird, and the bird was the queen of the other birds.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really silly, and maybe, okay, is this a child? No, it was an adult novel before she started writing about talking animals, and that's brilliant. So yeah, check her out, definitely.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting.
I do like to promote women in science fiction because there's not a lot of them.
No, yeah. Well, that's like I was, I'm trying to even out for the year. I just, a friend of mine, he's like, you talk to, he's like, you've interviewed a lot of these people. I said, well, I'm trying to get more women in science fiction, horror and fantasy. I said, it just so happens that I said, I just have saved them for the second part of the season 1. I said, all of a sudden, I was like, I don't know why it worked out for, different people's schedule and things. But yeah, but it was kind of, I thought it was interesting because a couple years ago I didn't know that many. But now within, really the last year, I've met a lot more, which has been really cool, particularly in science fiction. Fantasy, I feel like I've always known quite a few. But yeah, in terms of science fiction, it's gone up a lot, at least in the, the indie community. So it's been very interesting and cool to see, get that new perspective. So.
And she's kind of semi-indie. She has a publisher.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But she's also self-published. But that's me. Well, they call that hybrid.
Yeah. The good life, as we call it.
Yeah, the Mars book was self-published. That series was self-published. The Treasures of Space book, Treasure of the Black Hole, that series was self-published. Oh. But all my fantasies, the Rock Killer, Forces, which is science fiction, those were published by a small press publisher, World Castle Publishing.
Oh, cool. And then for that last one, like I was saying earlier, like we talked a little bit. So what news or, updates or anything like that, or any, current projects, things like that, have you been working on lately?
Oh, let me think. I'm working on a book about asteroid mining, but I took it from the rock killer people doing the mining to the robots doing the mining.
Oh, that's cool.
And what happens is, in the first part of the book, so I'm not giving away spoilers, if somebody hijacks an asteroid and aims it at Beijing,
oh, that's really cool.
Heroes have to stop the asteroid. And I was in a store the other day, and this was probably a Christian thing. She said, "Mountain mover." I'm going, "Mountain mover, okay." And I came with this line: "Moving an asteroid is akin to moving a mountain." And I'm going to put that in the book somewhere.
Yeah.
And then I thought somebody could say, "Are you telling me this is a matter of faith?" And I'm like, no, it's a matter of science. But I'm working on that novel. The first draft is done. All 3 of my edit revisions are done. And now I'm going through it with my writers group, and they're ripping it apart.
The usual, the sharks have gotten it in the water.
Yeah, they're finding the mistakes I didn't find. Calculating an orbit is tough sometimes.
Yeah.
And I had to do so much. The Earth turns this way, the asteroid's going this way. If it misses Beijing, where's it going to hit? And yeah, it was tough science fiction writing. It's one of the hardest ones I've written ever since Rock Killer. Rock Killer, there weren't any orbits. Everything was just kind of moving in a straight line. But it was. So I'm hoping that's going to come out. Well, it's not going to come out this year. I'm hoping that's going to come out early next year.
Okay.
As soon as my writers group finishes with it, we're doing 2 chapters at a time, and there's 25 chapters, so that's 12 and a half meetings, and the meetings are every other week, so it's like 1 chapter a week. And usually I do something on Black Friday. This year it's early, and I do it in conjunction with an online writers group I'm in, and they haven't put anything up on it yet, but I might be having a Black Friday sale. And I hate to use the word might, be really good. Say, yeah, I'm having a Black Friday sale. But unfortunately, at this point, I don't know if I am or not.
Yeah.
Depends on what happens with the writing group.
Yeah.
But my self-published books are all on Kindle Unlimited. So that there's that. And they're available for the Kindle. You can get a paperback on Amazon, or some of them are on Barnes and Noble. All but 3 books are on Barnes and Noble. I don't know why they're not on Barnes and Noble. I've tried to figure that out. And so, Smugglers of Mars was going to be a short story. I was sitting around one day. I was bored. I thought, I'll write a story about this character from Treasures of Space when he was intelligence operative for the evil empire, and it turned into a 3-book series.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I gotta say, it definitely piqued my interest. I think I had seen someone share, I think it was book 2 for you for that series, and I was scrolling through and I was like, wait a minute. So I had to go back up and I was like, what is this about? And then I went on to Goodreads. I was like, okay. So I added it right away and I was like, follow.
The 3 Species War.
Yeah.
The working title of that was The Roach Incursion. And I thought, people might think it's about roaches. So I changed it to The 3 Species War.
Yeah. I really liked it. So yeah, I'm anxious to get that one here.
Okay.
Very, very quickly. So yeah, that was cool. And I think it was just really it was a couple of months ago when I saw that on Twitter. So yeah, I added that to my Goodreads mountain range, as I like to say. All right. Well, we really want to thank you for coming on today, Evan. Thank you so much. And Evan and I really want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. You can find our videos on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and David, my tech guy, my best friend, got the audio on Spotify. Good to go. Like I was saying earlier to you, Evan, we'll make sure that we get, the everything in the description for you for those, so that way people can find you really easily. You guys, my audience, know the drill. You go to that description, you can find, his books anywhere on the planet or outer space as well, as it so has it. And then we'll make sure, we get that into the Spotify description as well. You can always reach us at scholarsofuma, that's UMA, @gmail.com. That's my direct email. We'd like to see, any of you guys that have questions. A few people have, sent in some things for past authors we have. So if you have any questions, for Evan, or, comments, things like that. Authors love when people say, hey, I love your book, things like that. We'll make sure to get those messages to him. Any questions that you have, for Evan or future guests, make sure you email to those as well. If you have any videos or pictures that are fantasy or sci-fi related, we'd love to put those up on the website and on our social media as well. Evan, really want to thank you again for coming on. It was a pleasure having you. Love to talk to you in the future, when you have, a next book out, things like that. Hopefully we can help you with the promos and, the sales and, anything like that. So.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it a lot.
No, excellent. Well, hopefully I'll talk to you soon on Twitter, my friend, and I hope you have a good rest of the day, okay?
Thanks, you too.
Perfect. Talk to you later.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.